I heard terrifying whispers outside my window, 3 true stories of uninvited dark presences. I never should have opened that door. There it was, a normal Saturday night. I curled up on my couch, the smell of popcorn filling the air. My favorite horror movie flickered on the screen. The familiar thrill wrapped around me like a blanket. Just a typical evening, right? But the moment I heard those whispers, everything changed. It was like icy fingers running down my spine. Unease. Something was out there, lurking. The darkness outside felt thicker, heavier. The streetlight's glow barely cut through it. Shadows danced like specters. I leaned closer to the window, heart racing. "Hello?" I whispered, a futile attempt to break the growing tension. The whispers shushed, then erupted into frantic murmurs. They felt like claws scratching at my sanity. The chill in the air seeped into my bones. A soft creak from the old floorboards made me jump. It was so quiet, but somehow the whispers grew louder. I could hear words now dissonant, nonsensical. "Find me," they seemed to say. Goosebumps prickled my skin. I pressed my face against the cold glass, searching the shadows for something, anything, and then a sudden thud echoed outside. My breath hitched in my throat. Was someone there? A figure emerged, barely visible. It stood still, cloaked in darkness. My heart thundered, pounding in my chest. I never should have opened that door. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The figure stood motionless, a twisted silhouette against the backdrop of swirling shadows. It was indistinct, but I could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness, locking onto mine with a chilling urgency. Those whispers intensified, a chorus of ethereal voices swirling around me, each life cycle of sound echoing with desperation. "Find me," they begged, stretching like shadows reaching for light. My heart threatened to burst as the thud from outside resonated again, this time louder, as if some unseen force was demanding entry into my world. Suddenly, a flicker of light danced nearby. The streetlight had flickered before plunging back into darkness, and for just a fleeting moment, I glimpsed something inhuman within the murk. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a passage of shadows. There were features, sunken cheeks, a grotesque mouth twisted in an eternal silent scream. It felt impossibly close now, yet I still didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away, feeling my legs strain under the weight of an ancient fear, an instinct as primal as the haunting whispers that flowed beneath my skin. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might shield me from the threat outside. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with an oppressive dread that clung to me like a shroud. I stumbled to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water that trembled in my grip. My thoughts raced. Was this a figment of fear, just my imagination running wild in the shadowy corners of my mind? Or was it something far worse, feeding off my apprehension? The whispers demanded to be heard, growing in intensity, their message clearer now, almost crystal. "Find me before it's too late. Wouldn't it be easier to just ignore it?" I thought frantically, but a sense of burgeoning responsibility pricked under my skin, the urge to unravel whatever curse had been cast upon me. Feeling slightly emboldened by the absurdity of my own resolve, I crept back toward the window, inching the curtain aside just enough to peer through. The street remained lifeless, yet the air hovered with an unshakable tension, as though waiting for something to break the silence. Then, out of nowhere, a sudden blast of cold air swirled through the open window. Where had that even come from? I gasped, dropping the curtain. Something whispered behind me now, close enough for me to feel the caress of its breath against my neck. "Help me." I whipped around, adrenaline pulsing through my veins, but all I saw was the fraying fabric of my own reality. My home was still just at my home, but it felt violated, intruded upon by a presence that wasn't just lingering at the door. It was here. It was inside, and then I saw it, a sliver of darkness creeping from beneath the kitchen door, a shadow not belonging to anything in this world. It spread like ink, pooling across the floor, reaching upwards, clawing its way toward me. I froze. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor as dreadful resolve encased me. It stopped inches from my toes, forming an unsettling figure, a blend of agony and indignation. "Help me," the voice cracked with anguish, and suddenly I knew this was no mere haunt, it was a fragment of something tethered to the very ground I stood on. "Help you?" I finally managed to croak. What do you want?" The darkness pulsed, shifting and swirling, growing clearer. A face formed, a child's, with sunken eyes as deep and endless as the void around us. The whispers roared back to life, as if tearing through the thin veil between us. Before it takes me." It screamed, fingers reaching, threading through the darkness as though grasping for air. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the figure lunged. It wrapped around my ankles, pulling me into the very darkness I feared. I screamed, a primal sound born of pure terror. The world around me twisted, warped, and then all at once, everything fell silent, but in that deafening stillness, I felt a warmth as if I was not alone anymore. In the depths of the nothingness that stretched infinitely around me, a voice spoke. Again, louder this time, echoing in a horrid symphony of despair. "Find me or we are both lost." And then I saw it, a flicker of light in the distance, dancing just beyond my reach. But it was not salvation, it was the embodiment of my greatest fear. The whispers surged again, drowning out all rational thought. With the darkness tightening around me, I realized one horrifying truth: I had let the night in. And the horrors that awaited behind the veil were far worse than I had ever imagined. As I surged toward the light, desperate for rescue, a laugh echoed, twisting the very air around me. It was familiar, too familiar. I froze mid-step, for it was my own voice. With a snap, the light vanished, plunging me back into endless darkness, and the night whispered once more, "You should have stayed inside." As the weight of darkness settled back in, suffocating and thick, I clawed at the air, desperate to find a solid surface, a lifeline. Panic thrummed through my chest, urging me to act, to escape, but the very essence of terror had folded around me, trapping me in a nightmare of my own making. I could hear it more clearly now. The laughter echoed through the void, not just mine, but layered upon a chorus of other voices, distorted and mocking. "Find me," they all sang, a twisted lullaby that thrummed through the darkness, stitching my fear tighter with threads of despair. With effort, I managed to crawl away from the grasp of the dark child's form, my hands scratching against the unseen ground beneath me, and began to roll, seeking distance from that malignant darkness that cradled me so intimately. Each movement felt futile, an exercise in agony and disorientation. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my heart to steady, as I counted the whispers that slithered around me. 1, 2, 3. There were far too many to count, shifting and rising like an unholy tide, pushing against the walls of my mind, and then, the world around me shifted again. A sudden warmth bathed me, cutting through the choking darkness, bringing a semblance of clarity. I blinked, squinting against the light that roared back to life, a flickering bulb casting a pool of sickly yellow on a battered living room. I lay sprawled on the floor, gasping, the nightmare clinging to my skin. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting the seconds in a mocking rhythm. I knew I had to get up, but the physical remnants of terror weighed down my limbs. My home was the same, yet it felt irrevocably altered, as though it had absorbed the shadows of my recent experience. As I tried to steady myself against the wall, there came a soft thump from the hallway, like footsteps quietly intruding into my sanctuary. The eeriness crawled back over me, cold and unwelcome. I was not alone. Stepping cautiously into the hallway, I squinted through the lingering shadows, heart racing with each soft creak of the floorboards beneath me. The faint scent of damp earth hung in the air, an unsettling reminder of what had just transpired. Memories of the darkness beckoned, whispering seductive promises of power but coated in a rectified dread. That melody of whispers grew once more, swirling. "Find me, in the attic." The plea, laced with a child's note of desperation, sent shivers racing down my spine. Was the spirit still here? What was hidden above me, waiting, watching? The attic door loomed at the end of the hallway like a gaping mouth leading into the unknown. It had always felt sinister. I felt drawn to it, but each step became heavier, a battle of will against that low, chilling hum inside my head, a chant that urged me closer, promising understanding. "Find me." The sing-song cry poured from the very frame of the doorknob felt surprisingly warm in my grasp, almost as if it pulsed with life. My heart raced as I turned it slowly, the ancient hinges creaking in protest as the door opened into darkness. A staircase spiraled up into the gloom, descending into a shadowy maw that beckoned me to ascend. The whispers had grown sharper, then all at once fell silent, leaving only the echo of my breath in the thick air. With every reluctant step, the feel of something alive skittered against the wood, brushing against my legs. I glanced down, only to find a wisp of darkness flicker before disappearing, retreating back into the shadows. "Please don't leave me," it grieved, a familiar voice submerged in the eerie tide that I forced myself to climb higher, a single beam of dust-filled light breaking through a broken window, illuminating scattered boxes and forgotten relics of a past life that seemed foreign to me now. But in the center of it all, directly beneath the light, a simple child's toy lay on the floor, a pale, porcelain doll, its once cheerful face cracked and eerie. Its hollow eyes glimmered in the light, almost too alive against the dark backdrop that I reached out, fingers trembling, drawn inexplicably to this object of innocence that felt tainted with the chill of age-old despair. The doll's mouth opened, trembling as though causing a dull vibration through the air. "You found me," it drawled, the voice not of a child but an echo of the shadows I had felt below, unearthing something terrifying from within. The ceiling above me creaked insidiously, as if the structure itself mourned the loss of the secrets entombed in the attic. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a resounding bang, plunging me into darkness once more. Lights flickered around me, the whispers returned in a violent crescendo, scratching against my mind. "Now you must help us or forever join us." I staggered back, and just as I stumbled, the doll leaped to life, its cracked porcelain body darting toward me with an unnatural speed. My breath hitched in my throat as I turned to flee, only to find the dark child had materialized at the top of the staircase, face twisted into a grotesque smile that echoed my worst fears. The darkness rippled around me, engulfing everything I knew, clawing closer, as I grasped the fact that the whispers were not just calling out for help. They were demanding it. In that moment, I glimpsed something shifting beside me, a flicker of movement, something outside the attic door. I dared to turn, my pulse throbbing in my ears, heart racing toward a revelation I desperately wished to deny. The door shook violently, rattling the frame as if something unseen was desperate to get in. And then, through the crack, a monstrous visage emerged, dark yet somehow familiar, woven dread into the very fabric of night. A voice like mine, dripping with malice, growled the words I feared all too much for comprehension. "Find me, or you'll never escape this place." I was paralyzed, anguish constricting my throat as I stared at the door, knowing deep down that whatever lurked beyond the threshold was not meant to be seen. The doll's haunting laughter resonated in the hollow air, a grating reminder that my very life now hung precariously on a thread woven of fear and desperation. "Find me, or you will never escape this place." The voice echoed as if the walls themselves were taunting me, tightening the grip of dread around my heart. With an instinct born of panic, I dashed to the opposite corner of the attic, my breath coming in quick bursts, each inhale a sharp reminder that I was still here, still alive. But alive among entities that bled from the fabric of my very soul. As I turned away from the door, a bone-chilling cold swept over me, wrapping around my shoulders like a shroud. I felt their presence suffocating me, an unyielding pressure from beyond the darkness, whispering my name in a litany of voices that intertwined in maddening harmony. "Let us in. Find us." My eyes darted to the window above the rickety staircase, realizing it had been cracked open just enough to let in the breeze that whispered through the attic, carrying with it promises and threats alike. I stepped closer, the chilling air sending shivers racing down my arms. Peering into the night foretold nothing but impenetrable shadows, the moonlight struggling against the obsidian veil, casting grotesque shapes on the lawn below. I had to know, I had to understand. Plucking up every ounce of courage, I raised my trembling fingers to touch the window, the jagged edge cutting into my skin. Kicking back the fabric of my hesitations, I leaned out, straining to see what lay in the oppressive darkness, and then, amidst the shadows, I spotted them. Figures flitted through the trees, their features obscured, but unmistakably there. They moved with an almost hypnotic grace, twisting and curling like smoke, but their eyes, those glimmering orbs, fixated on me with a haunting familiarity. "Help us," they chorused, their voices unholy yet deeply human, each pitch rising and falling, now creeping into my mind with insidious intent. I recoiled, throat tightening as they reached out, slender fingers stretching toward me from the shadows. "Find us, or forever remain trapped," the dark child from the top of the stairs echoed, voice low and terrifyingly calm, a sickening juxtaposition to the distress building inside me. Desperate to leave, I turned back to the attic only to find the door now splintering, mere inches away from being torn apart. The doll floated towards me, grotesque and startlingly alive. Its previously cracked visage twisted into sheer terror as it opened its mouth again. You must understand, a long gash across its face widened grotesquely, revealing endless darkness that beckoned with each heartbeat. The attic felt like a thunderstorm contained within fragile walls, pressure building around me until I feared I might shatter under the weight of my own terror. There was no escape. I needed to fight back, to resist the symphony of persuasion that suffocated reason. But just as I regained a glimpse of clarity, the attic floor beneath my feet trembled, rumbles of an ancient sorrow swirling and rising up like a maelstrom. A shadow slithered toward me, drawing close enough that I could feel the cold breath of death whispering at my ear. With every heartbeat, the voices crescendoed, consuming me, demanding I listen. "Join us. We are here, we are everywhere." In that moment of despair, the shadows above became sentient. They rippled and undulated, reaching toward me with a hunger that was palpable, a craving for my essence laced in anguish. There was no room for denial. I realized they were no strangers. They were fragments of my past, tormented souls wearing familiar faces twisted in agony, intertwined forever in the darkness of this nightmarish trap. Eyes wide with realization, I stumbled backward, and they closed in, the dark child at the forefront, eyes glimmering with the knowing evil of too long unquenched. To find you is to find us. To lose you is to lose everything. As I braced for their full force, terror gripping me in its icy vice, I felt the window rattle violently behind me. Something pushed against it from the outside, seeking entrance into this realm between the worlds. My heart stopped when the fractured glass shattered, fragments swirling around like a deadly storm, tearing open a rift that gaped wide, a portal swirling with abyss and light, birthing unspeakable forms. Suddenly, the cacophony crescendoed to a piercing shriek as the duality of both sides collided, screaming for dominion in this wretched place. And then, with a deafening silence, the world around me stopped. I stood at the eye of the storm, the shadows nestling closer as if anticipating my next move, while the portal behind me glowed with a blinding light, promising safe passage, yet also unspeakable horrors. "Will you join us, or shall you be swallowed whole?" The haunting chorus howled, waiting for my answer with bated breath. Time itself felt suspended in that agonizing moment, for I knew the choice laid heavy upon me would echo for eternity. I inhaled deeply, my mind racing, choices blurring in the haze before the dark figure lunged forward, its collective despair reaching out to envelop me completely. In that instant, the last thread of clarity snapped, and bewilderment sent me spiraling into darkness once more, where nothing awaited but the promise of eternal shadows, forever broken. As I fell deeper into that void, one agonizing thought consumed me. What if, in my desire to escape, I had drawn the darkness closer than ever before? The whispers grew louder, clawing at my sanity as I fell through an abyss of shadow and sound. Anxiety gripped me tightly, an iron vice constricting against my lungs, squeezing out any thoughts of resistance. I was spiraling, drawn ever deeper into an endless night where faces of the damned loomed just out of sight, their lips moving in synchronized torment. They beckoned, promised salvation, and served only to deepen my fear. The boundary between me and the darkness began to thin, a fabric of reality shredding at the seams. I felt cold tendrils reach for me, brushing along my skin like a lover's caress, except this touch was laced with death. With every ounce of will I possessed, I fought back, screaming through the void where sound collided with silence. The echoes of my own voice retorted, "You cannot escape. You were chosen." A surge of desperation coursed through me, and as I plummeted deeper, fragments of memories fluttered by, horrifying snippets of moments tainted by loss and regret, faces of loved ones twisted in agony before being swallowed into the shadows. I remembered the day we had moved into this cursed house, the elation mixed with a cloud of foreboding that I had pushed aside. Little did I know, I was entering the mouth of the beast, and then, with a jolt that sent shockwaves through my fragile psyche, I collided with a hard surface. I lay sprawled in an expansive darkness, yet somehow, it felt like home, suffocating and familiar. Panic twisted within me as I realized I was in the attic again, yet everything was altered, grotesquely reshaped by the penetration of otherworldly forces. The doll hovered nearby, its form now grotesque and elongated, the laughter swirling with sadness until it erupted into a chilling cry that reverberated through my bones. "The door, it leads to oblivion. You've unleashed us." Each word dripped with a cruel understanding, sent to strip away any remaining sanity that I fought the urge to scream, wrestling against invisible hands that wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air supply. Shadows swirled around me like dark ribbons, coiling and intertwining. The window remained cracked open, sinister winds swirling outward as echoes of the outside world clawed at the veil, desperate to be let in. "Let me see," I rasped, my desperation drowning out panic as I staggered to the window, ignoring the doll's frantic warnings. Peering outward, the night clutched at me with a savage glee. Figures flickered in and out of sight beneath the gnarled trees, twisted remnants of life that had been snuffed out. "Help us!" they wailed, their voices harmonizing into a haunting symphony of despair that filled every inch of my mind. Faces flashed before me, friends and family, their features contorted in agony, transforming into grotesque parodies of themselves, bound in chains of suffering, waiting for me to reach out. "Why didn't you help us?" one cried out, a hollow echo that rattled through my core, leaving only a void in its wake. "No," I whimpered, staggering back as waves of guilt crashed over me, forcing my knees to buckle against the rough floorboards. I clutched at my head, trying to erase their accusations, their despair surging around me like a tide that threatened to drown my very essence. Suddenly, the shadows around the window beckoned me forward, a movement fueled by a collective, ancient hunger. In an instant of deflation, the air shifted, and the laughter returned, a cruel reminder of my own rotten helplessness. "Choose," the voices taunted, echoing through the darkened corners of the room. In a moment of clarity, the realization struck me the walls were bearing witness to. Dark shapes emerged from the depths, beings drawn not just from the fears within me but from something even older, something longing for freedom. The air thickened with anticipation as they converged, howling at the impending choice I teetered on. "Join us, become one, together we will be powerful." The chorus rose to a chilling crescendo, drowning my resolve under waves of intoxicating temptation. My heart raced, a furious drum in the chaos. As I wrestled with the very essence of my being, am I their savior, or merely another lost soul? And then, it happened. The doll's laughter twisted into a scream that shattered the boundaries of thought and reason, a high-pitched wail that reverberated off the very fabric of reality, or what was left of it. As I struggled to comprehend, a piercing light sliced through the gloom, illuminating the attic with divine brilliance. In that blinding moment, the shadows recoiled, shrieking in agony as their insatiable hunger was momentarily eclipsed. "You cannot choose the light," they screeched, voices mingling with their eternal torment. But suddenly, from that radiant core, a figure emerged, stepping forth from the light, a woman, resplendent and ethereal, with eyes as deep as the shadows that surrounded me. "Run!" she commanded, her voice a powerful tremor that resonated within the marrow of my bones. "You must escape. Choice is the path to destruction." Before I could process her command, she outstretched her hand toward me, a bridge between the realm of light and a deeper darkness that still beckoned with sickening tendrils. The shadows clambered back, rearing and swirling like a storm, howling their bitter retribution. Then, a bone-chilling laugh pierced through the cacophony. "You cannot leave, whatever you decide, we will have you." The floor beneath me began to fracture, splinters of wood giving way to a yawning chasm that opened wider than my mind could fathom, darkness pooling beneath like a hungry mouth. That was when my heart sank into my stomach as I sensed the shadowy masses approaching, closing in around me. The air electrified with palpable dread, the walls trembling as the desperate whispers sharpened to a keen edge, and I understood, my time was running out. As I teetered on the brink, the woman's outstretched hand wavered, wavering between shadow and light. And just as I was about to make my choice, the rift below erupted, and a monstrous howl poured forth from the depths, tearing away the fabric of what little hope remained. With one last surge of determination, I grasped for her hand as the darkness lunged forward, ravenous, and everything went black. When consciousness returned, I was sprawled in a place devoid of warmth, my skin prickling with an icy grasp. I blinked several times, confusion mingling with dread as shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. Sitting up slowly, I found myself surrounded by ghostly remnants. Fog-cloaked figures drifted like lost droplets in a tempest, their silent cries echoing off an unseen wall that seemed to envelop me entirely. "What is this place?" I murmured, my voice barely more than a whisper, swallowed up by the dense air thick with despair. The chilling realization hit me: the attic had transformed, warping into a vast expanse that felt both foreign and eerily familiar, a dimension where shadows mingled with lost souls, spinning stories of anguish that clawed at my senses. The fabric stretched before me, a nightmarish canvas of despair painted in shades darker than the deepest void. Flashes of memory shone like dying embers, illuminating faces that I knew but could barely recognize. Distorted visages flickered in and out of view like old film projected onto a warped screen. I staggered to my feet, a tumult of emotions surging as a sob crackled in my throat. "Help us," they lamented, their outstretched hands groping through the space, their fingers weaving threads of darkness that coiled around my legs. Several figures emerging to surround me, their bodies shifting between skeletal forms and fleshy grotesqueries, lips twisted into smiles of torment that curdled my blood. "A choice must be made," a voice shrieked from the amalgam of shadows, sending shivers down my spine. "You cannot linger in the veil of indecision, it will consume you." I wanted to scream, to cry for help, yet a thick fog encased my vocal cords, suffocating the words before they could escape. "What choice?" The question escaped in an almost childlike tone, disbelief lacing my voice. I stumbled backward, only to trip over another lost soul, who stared at me with wide, hollow eyes, pleading for salvation or perhaps condemning me for my presence. The atmosphere quivered, anticipation crackling in the air like live wires. In that charged moment, something within me flickered, ignited by raw panic. I had to instigate movement, ground myself beyond the encroaching shadows and their malevolent whispers. A conclusion, a destination anywhere but here. With every ounce of courage left, I shouted, "I choose to fight." The relentless shroud pulsed, a ripple of anger coursing through the spectral assembly as my defiance tore through their dreary fabric of fear. I turned, desperate to flee this Stygian horror, and dashed toward the only semblance of light I recognized, a shimmering veil that flickered at the horizon. Unlike anything else I had seen, the shadows hissed in anger, tormented screams rising as I made my way toward that sanctuary, but a surge of ethereal force shot through the air, smashing against my back and sending me sprawling once more. The figures surrounded me, gnashing their teeth as a hushed chant filled the space. "You cannot escape. Let us in. Join us." Desperation clawed at my chest like a coiling serpent, leaving me gasping for breath. I turned, drenched in the hauntings of their memories, every sorrow echoing in unison inside my mind. The voices twisted and coiled into a singular form that congealed before me, taking on recognizable features. My mother's face materialized, racked with grief, mouth curled in a silent scream beseeching me to succumb. "Don't you see?" she whispered, her desolate eyes piercing through me. "You've abandoned us. You must understand this is where we belong." The truth reverberated through my core as their spectral hands reached out, brushing against my skin like the frailties of my spirit, ripping away any fragile shell of denial. Agony and longing resonated against the pulse of eternity, each heartbeat wrapping around my drenched reality as the thought clawing at the edges of my mind solidified. No. I howled, wrenching myself away from that visage of grief, my heart pounding fiercely as panic threatened to overwhelm me. Instead, every seething breath I drew reminded me of my own existence, lucid yet fragile, coiled tighter than the tendrils closing in. Moving again, I grasped at the fabric of the air, feeling a semblance of resistance. I pictured the exit, envisioned what lay beyond this torment: life, freedom. The spectral figures lunged, their whispers converging on me like a storm as I staggered toward the maliciously glittering veil. A surge of force propelled me forward. "Let me go!" I screamed, the air constricting around me, urging me to return to the grips of their despair. I reached for the luminous barrier, nearly brushing it, feeling its warmth radiating just beyond grasp. "Join us!" they screamed, their voices entwined in a frenzy of chaos. The shadowy mass surged forth, fingers like knives, slashing the air around me. In an explosive instant, I broke through. But just as I stumbled into the light's embrace, an intense pain flared in my side, a sharp, icy stab that resonated with the air, colder than the shadows themselves. I looked down and saw a shadowy appendage pierce through me, erupting from the void. "Hurry, you must!" the woman's voice from before echoed through the chaos, drowning beneath the cacophony as I felt darkness lapping at the edges of my consciousness, malignancy creeping through the very fibers of my being, and then I fell, clawing at the thin veil between life and agony, grappling for the fleeting shards of light beginning to dim. The shadows wailed, shattering the realm itself as I spiraled into the depths. "Never forget you belong to us." Their voices melded into a cacophony that consumed me whole, a laugh filled with endless hunger echoing as I began to descend into the void, enveloped by a darkness knowing no end. My final thought broke through the surface: what awaited me on the other side was yet unfathomable, and everything I clung to may very well be a lie. The darkness enveloped me like a shroud, a viscous fog that dulled my senses. It pressed against my skin, cold and suffocating, as I drifted aimlessly through an unceasing void. No sounds reached my ears, even the agonizing howls of the shadows ceased as if they had turned their attention elsewhere. All was silent. All was still. Reluctantly, I opened my eyes to find myself lying on a cold, damp surface. Face down in what felt like dirt, I could taste the grit clinging to my tongue. I pushed myself up, instincts warning me of the disturbances in the air vibrating around me like a tense cord ready to snap. The dim light was barely enough to carve out my surroundings, yet I could make out the outlines of crumbling walls, long-forgotten remnants of a place steeped in dread. The air reeked of decay, a stench heavy and palpable, hanging thick like a funeral pall. "Hello," I uttered, heart racing, the sound echoing back at me insidiously. It was a distortion, a taunt resonating through narrow passageways that coiled into the unknown. As I regained my senses, the faint flicker of something caught my gaze. A candle burned dimly in a corner, flickering with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. Moving toward it felt like moving through molasses, each step weighted by uncertainty. The shadows licked at my consciousness, whispering promises of reprieve and surrender. I resisted, focusing instead on that tiny source of light, my lighthouse in a maelstrom of uncertainty. The candle illuminated a small alcove, its glow revealing grotesque murals etched into the stone walls, distorted faces twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes, though painted, seemed to follow my every movement, simmering with mockery. I could hardly breathe, a weight pressed into my chest, as if the very spirit of the walls recoiled from my presence. As I reached out to the flickering flame, shadows surged, swirling like a tempest around me. Whispers rose from the depths of the dark, a perverse symphony that clawed at my sanity. They began to coalesce, rising into figures that danced on the edges of perception, twitching, grim remnants of souls lost beneath the weight of malignant despair. "Why do you resist?" A breathy voice slithered through the air, curling around my spine like ice. "You cannot escape now, you've brought their darkness with you." In that instant, memories flooded back, fragments of the attic, of shackled whispers begging for release, my mother's anguished visage contorting even now into the skeletal horror of that visage. I stumbled back, fear igniting like wildfire within my veins. Silence. I gasped, yet it rang hollow in the cacophony of despair that enveloped me. The shadows surged forward, fingers elongated and trace barely there, seeking the warmth of my flesh, as if they craved my very essence. The candle sputtered, nearly extinguished under the weight of their encroaching darkness. With an instinctual jerk, I blew against the flame, a desperate attempt to unleash it against the shadowed tide. The resultant flame flared, illuminating the grotesque figures surrounding me, their forms warping as if they were caught in an unseen wind. They recoiled but quickly regrouped, an unholy chorus of wails rising to fill the air, a funeral dirge echoing through the accursed hall. Desperate, I crashed against the stone wall behind me, the ancient surface, despite its chill, giving me a momentary feeling of connection to some past reality. There, amidst the shadows, I glimpsed an outline, a doorway, frame barely visible against the surrounding darkness, a thread of hope twinkling just beyond my reach. "Help us!" they chorused, their mouths forming grim shapes in the flickering glow. The dread clutched at my throat like a vice as I considered the path from which these dark beings pleaded. "Join us!" The voice was closer now, seductive and heavy, wrapping itself around my brain like ink on parchment. I turned to flee, wrestling against the net of shadows, the weight of their despair nearly suffocating. But as I approached the door, I realized the haunting shadows converged from all angles, filling every crevice, drowning every hope for freedom. Just as I reached for the door handle, it surged open suddenly, revealing a realm beyond one drenched in light and shadows intertwined. But along with that light came a terrifying presence, a towering figure, shrouded in a cloak woven from the very fabric of night. "Leave this place, if you dare!" it bellowed, its voice rumbling through the air like thunder. The shadows faltered in their pursuit, momentarily stilled by fear, allowing me the breath of a moment to decide, yet as I pushed against the darkness rushing back to engulf me, sheer terror gnawed at my insides. I had come so close to release, yet something buried deep within warned me this sanctuary was no refuge, it was a trap, a beguiling promise to draw me in rather than free me. That I couldn't stay there, not while the specters thrummed around me, awaiting the moment my resolve would falter. With desperation coursing through my veins, I turned toward that threshold, racing towards it, pulsing shimmers of fear mingling with hope, but just before I could step into that light, a hand cold as the grave shot out, wrapping around my wrist with an icy grasp. It was different from the others, this one felt ancient and malevolent, a tether to the past that sent jolts of agony through my body. "Stay!" the voice hissed, and suddenly, the shadows transformed. They morphed into forms I recognized, those I had lost, twisting and writhing backward. Their smiles now marred by despair, they pulled against me, dragging me back toward the abyss. "Join us!" From all corners, they shrieked, the promise of oblivion mingling hauntingly with familiar faces, and then I realized, in that cruel moment of desperation, that I might not be the only one trapped here. What if my choice would cost them their last hope of freedom? "Let me go!" I screamed, yet the shadows tightened their grip as the sinister figure's crackling laughter echoed in my ears like the tolling of a funeral bell, and at that moment, the sheer weight of their despair struck me, and the ichor of their cries hollowed my heart. Before I could comprehend the weight of that dread, the world around me exploded into chaos, a maelstrom of shadow and light. With my final breath, I swung toward the darkness, realizing that sometimes, surrendering to despair can be the most terrifying choice of all. "Are you ready to join?" the shadows murmured as I slipped into utter blackness, dragging me into eternal chaos. The cold seeping through the cracked walls felt like the fingers of the damned, clawing at my sanity. I blinked, praying to regain focus, as my surroundings shimmered and danced in the flickering candlelight. The whispers had quieted, but their sinister echoes throbbed incessantly in my mind. The oppressive darkness surrounding me pulsed with a life of its own, each breath heavier than the last, each heartbeat a countdown to impending doom. I could feel eyes on me, piercing through the veil of night that hung thick and suffocating like a spider's web. Then, just beyond my line of sight, I noticed the remnants of clutter scattered on the ground, a broken doll, its eye missing, a rusted music box that, even now, echoed long-forgotten lullabies. With slow, cautious steps, I ventured toward what had once been a child's playroom. The air carried a metallic scent, as though the very essence of innocence had been steeped in blood long ago. As I combed through the debris, a frigid breath of wind snuffed out the candlelight, plunging me into darkness anew. My pulse thundered in my ears, the silence thick enough to choke on, suffocating like a memory I dared not unearth. Suddenly, the music box clicked to life. An eerie tune broke through the suffocating quiet, notes twisted and warped like reflecting screams. The melody echoed against hollow walls, eliciting a strange familiarity that sent chills racing along my spine. I staggered backward as a shadow darted past, a fleeting glimpse of something grotesque, its movement fluid, almost serpentine. "Don't run," a sweet, childlike voice sing-songed from the black. It was simultaneously enchanting and terrifying. "You're not supposed to run." I whipped around, searching for any sign, any flicker of light. But the shadows grew heavier, folding in on themselves, curling like vapors around my ankles as they coiled higher, clawing at me. I had turned too many times in circles. The stark reality of my situation gripped me, spiraling me deeper into a pit of unrest. Then came the growl, a low, guttural sound that slithered under my skin and rattled the bones within. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but where? Each direction was a mirror of dread, betraying safety for the unknown. Heart racing, I seized a shard of glass glinting ominously in the dim haze. The weapon felt wretchedly inadequate as I gripped it tightly. "Join us," the voice sang, rising now in pitch, a chorus of terrified children creeping through the stagnant air, wrapping around me like ivy choking a tree. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, synchronized with the pulse of the room, a dreadful heartbeat of its own. "Leave me be," I shouted, the desperation leaking through fissures in my courage. But the walls answered, resonating with their silent stares, casting shadows that flickered and twisted in grotesque patterns. The forgotten figures began to emerge, silhouettes of thin, emaciated limbs that stretched beyond the bounds of humanity. "Find us before it's too late," they begged, their mouths snapping open and closed. A distorted echo of bygone days reached out to me, begging for salvation. I felt the warmth of horror seep away, replaced by the cold caress of spectral fingers clasping my limbs. From the corner of my eye, I caught a fleeting glimpse, a face yearning for release, eyes wide and unblinking, staring with terror and despair. A scream lodged itself in my throat, each familiar face twisted in cycles of agony. Curses hung in the air like thin smoke. Suddenly, the cacophony rose, a tumult of muffled cries battling against a spine-tingling static. It overwhelmed my senses, drowning me in wavering uncertainty. I staggered backward and felt something crunch beneath my feet. An artifact of some sort, a tattered photograph, a snapshot of younger days, with innocent faces obscured by the weight of time. And then it clicked, a foggy memory settled in the back of my mind. My own laughter was stacked against theirs, so familiar, so lost. The image revealed not just faces, but history woven into each spine-chilling smile. Before I could process any further, the shadows surged forward, impeding my exit, clamoring for attention, wrapping their tendrils around me. "Choose," they cried, the growls turning to a fevered whisper as they leaned closer, stretching their warped faces into the forefront of existence. "Join us, or perish alone." The guttural voice thundered from beyond the walls, shaking the very foundation beneath me. "Join us, and your fate will be one of freedom." And then I saw it, a pinpoint of blinding white light just beyond the reach of the shadows, glimmering like the last hope of salvation, tauntingly close. But even as I inhaled, the shadows wrapped tighter, suffocating any chance of escape as their depths pulled me toward an unfathomable void. In a final act of defiance, I drove the shard of glass into the ground before me, its piercing cry resounding in the air, hoping to quell the darkness. But suddenly, the wail of anguished cries enveloped me. The earth vibrated, and the very walls began to crackle and split. "Choose." The chorus erupted, rising into a fevered pitch as the shadows clawed at my legs. I hurled myself toward the light, scraping against the hard ground, pain seared through me. But in my frantic panic, I turned back one last time. And as I did, I froze. The faces morphed. It was me, my own visage twisted in agony, melding into the vast tapestry of the damned, whispering the longing of unfulfilled choices. The final thread pulling at my heart shattered with a deafening crack. I stumbled forward, consumed by the surreal agony of existence torn asunder, not knowing if I would ever escape, not knowing if this was truly the end. And just as I reached for that tantalizing light, a figure emerged from the depths of darkness, a figure that mirrored my own, with eyes that bore a hunger deeper than despair. The last thing I remember was the chill of its touch before all went black, and the whispers began anew, an eternal resonance that would never let me go. The stillness of the air became oppressive, stifling, as if alive with breath held in anticipation. I awoke to find myself lying on the cold, damp floor, shards of glass scattered around me like fallen stars. A thick darkness cloaked the room, swallowing the edges of my vision into nothingness. The oppressive silence that followed felt like the calm before an unspeakable storm. Panic surged through me as I shot to my feet, heart pounding, a frantic drumbeat echoing against my ears. I twisted to survey my surroundings. The child's playroom that had just gripped me in suffocating terror now seemed vacant, the remnants of childhood laughter reduced to muted specters of melancholy. The shadows remained, but they didn't shift or pulsate like before. Now they sat heavy and still, waiting. With a resolve born of desperation, I stumbled toward the door. As I reached for the handle, an icy gust of wind swept through, ruffling my hair and stealing the breath from my lungs. It curled around me like a serpent, pulling me back, reminding me that I was far from alone. The whispers began again, soft at first, but swelling into a tumultuous swell of accusations and pleas. "Come back. Stay with us," they cried, haunting melodies spiraling through the air, thick with longing and despair, reverberating in my very soul. That I pressed against the door, heart racing, and for a disorienting moment, I felt as though the walls themselves could hear my thoughts and desires. The timbers creaked and groaned as if responding to the urgency mounting within me. I could no longer tell where the whispers ended and my own thoughts began. The fading outlines of the room morphed, the edges fraying like an old photograph, revealing fleeting images that danced before my mind. Children, their faces twisted in a mockery of joy, dark forms looming just behind them, teeth glinting like knives in the pale light. But before I could comprehend the horror, the door swung open unexpectedly, a gust of wind pushing me into the hallway beyond, a corridor characterized by shadowy yawns and dusty corners. I stumbled forward blindly, driven by fear rather than reason. My bare feet patted against the cold wood, echoing like a metronome against the encroaching silence. As I rushed into the corridor, I was drawn to the flickering light at the far end, beckoning like the sun breaking through storm clouds. I could just make out the outlines of a once vibrant mural hanging on the wall. It depicted children playing, their faces bright with joy, but as I approached, a wave of unease washed over me. The images began to distort, warping into grimaces of despair, their once playful hands now reaching out to me with desperate claws. In my haste, I turned back, desperate to escape the malevolent presence I could feel lurking just behind the walls, but that change of heart came too late. Shadows slinked forward from darkened corners, coiling around my legs, their icy grip igniting a primal terror in my heart. They tightened with each panicked step backward, threatening to pull me back into their inescapable fold. "No!" I shouted, my voice trembling, the desperation clawing at my throat. I flailed against the unseen bonds, each grasp of the shadowy tendril sending waves of horror reverberating through my body. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream pierced the tense air, a chorus of voices intertwined, shrill and pleading. They chanted in sorrow, "Join us! Join us!" The cries morphed into a cacophony of rage, the shadows growing thicker, writhing as though alive. I felt the ground beneath me tremble. A low rumble reverberated through the floor, and for a moment, I feared the house itself would collapse under the weight of their despair. Then, I saw them, figures emerging from the darkness, adorned with tattered remnants of clothing, faces obscured by shadows that flickered like dying embers. They reached for me with skeletal hands, their mouths moving in a cacophony of demands but no sound escaping, a silent insistence painted in the depths of their gaze. "Find them! Find us!" The voices surged anew, desperation spilling forth as they flowed toward me like smoke, filling the air with a sense of suffocating intimacy. Before I could even register their words, a blinding flash erupted along the corridor, a sickly yellow glow ignited all around me. I shielded my eyes, recoiling from the brightness, and when I looked again, I saw it. A door just beyond the shadowy grasp, lit as though the sun itself had emerged to usher me forth. But the shadows shifted, swirling with greater intensity, morphing into something more terrifying as they plastered themselves against the walls. The growling returned, low and malevolent, threatening, possessive. I was rooted in place, the wild pounding of my heart drowning out rational thought. I saw moving shadows spiral behind me, agitating my senses, dragging themselves into my mind like flowing ink. One last glance at the glowing door, and time seemed to slow around me. I felt the insidious pull of despair tighten its grip, a cruel laughter echoing just beneath the threshold of sanity. I inhaled sharply, made to dart toward the light, when suddenly, they surged forward, an army of darkness, crashing against me with unbridled fervor. The shadows enveloped me, a tempest of swirling darkness that stung against my skin. I gasped, choking on fear, the light blurring into oblivion. The whispering chorus crescendoed, creating dissonance within my own thoughts, and just as I closed my eyes, resigned to my fate, I caught one last flutter of clarity. A single voice, clear as a bell, broke through the chaos. It's your turn to choose. My heart sank as I felt the weight of a decision ride down upon my shoulders, the finality of it tightening around my throat. And as the lines of reality blurred, the last thing I felt was my own fingers frozen in melancholy remembrance, hovering, hesitating, over a gaping abyss, their ghostly touch reaching toward the splintered heart of the darkness as the world around me faded away. Behind me, a wail echoed, the sound of perpetual yearning, a reminder that there are fates worse than death, and that some doors, once opened, may never let you leave. I thought I had escaped the suffocating grasp of the darkness, at least, I had believed, until I woke once more in that damned attic, the air heavy with despair. My heart pounded against my chest, a primal rhythm echoing through the inky void around me. As I sat up, a panic bubbled within, twisting my insides into a knot. The walls, once filled with the chilling whispers of lost souls, had fallen silent, but the oppressive feeling of being watched returned, a malevolent gaze pressing down on me that I couldn't remember how I had gotten back here. It was as if I had been pulled from the very depths of my nightmare to face another. The faint glimmer of moonlight trickled through the broken window, casting a pale light over the scattered remnants of childhood, old toys, dust-covered books, and that accursed porcelain doll, now cracked and chipped, still staring with its hollow eyes. "Help us," came a faint echo, drifting through the stale air from somewhere beyond the dark wood beams of the attic. It was a child's voice, so sweet, so innocent, and yet it churned an icy dread within me. My instincts screamed to flee, to escape this place, but somehow, I felt tethered, bound by memories long buried. That I climbed unsteadily to my feet, dread pooling around my ankles as I edged toward the source of the echo. Each step felt heavy with unseen burdens. The shadows thickened, swirling like a storm around the corners of my vision, beckoning me to surrender to their tenacious grip. "Help us or you will join us," the voice echoed, no longer innocent, but layered with a haunting melody that twisted my heart. That I traced my fingers along the dust-coated shelves as I reluctantly moved closer to the attic door, its frame beckoning me into the unknown. Would venturing beyond these walls finally unveil the truth, or would it plunge me further into madness? I had fought too hard to reclaim my life, to let this despair consume me once more. No, I had to escape, but as I reached for the knob, a sharp chill raced down my spine. I hesitated, dread clawing at my throat. The moment I touched it, a flood of memories surged through me, my mother's laughter, the tender embrace of love, juxtaposed against screams of despair, a symphony orchestra of the damned. My hand trembled, and with a shuddering breath, I flung the door open. The sight beyond was not what I expected. There was no hallway, no world cloaked in soft moonlight, just an endless void, deep darkness filled with swirling tendrils that reached for me, eager and alive. I felt myself cocked back, like a taut bowstring, pulled into the very heart of the night. Before I could recoil, icy fingers snaked around my waist, tethering me to a past that fought to resurface. Bright light flickered in the corners of my mind, and that familiar childlike voice returned. "You have to find us," it sang sweetly, intertwining with strings of darkness that sought to snatch my very essence. My head swam, panic rising as distorted visions ignited like wildfire. Faces, twisted in agony and grief, emerged from the shadows. "Join us. Find us," they chanted, their voices melding into a cacophony so anguished that it pierced the remnants of clarity in my thoughts. Despair saturated every aspect of my being, dragging me deeper into the memories I had sought to flee. Just when I thought they would consume me whole, there was a shift in the air. Something crackled behind me, the attic door slammed shut, trapping me in a prison of whispers. The sound echoed ominously, an unholy promise that I was never meant to leave. I spun around, heart racing, only to find the walls melting away, revealing the very faces I had tried so desperately to forget. They emerged from the shadows, twisted and grotesque, former friends, family, now reduced to wretched beings tethered to their tragic ends. "Why didn't you save us?" A familiar face wailed, the pain in its voice slicing through me like a knife. "You left us behind." I staggered back, looking for an escape, but the echoes of their despair wrapped around me, tantalizing words shrieking from every corner of the attic. And then I saw it, a flicker of the past intertwined with the present, a mirror reflecting my own fears. It was my childhood self, eyes wide with innocence, grasping a tattered teddy bear that had been lost to time. "Help us!" it cried, reaching out, frozen in a moment of despair that echoed in my soul. "Stop! Please!" I shouted, my voice seeming small against the mounting chaos. Waves of shadows surged toward me, eager to drag me under, to claim what was rightfully theirs. I could feel the pull, a magnetic draw of anguish that threatened to shatter my resolve. This was no longer a simple haunting, it was a reckoning, a beckoning of the darkest parts of my own identity. "Find us, or remain lost," the voice fluttered, now more insistent, more real than ever. The shadows twisted into the shape of the lost children, their faces torn between tears and hopelessness. Fragmented memories fluttered as they reached for me, fingers brushing my skin, inviting me into a world I had forsaken. My heart raced, conflicting emotions colliding against the onslaught of shadow and light. Could I save them, or was I simply perpetuating their cycle of torment? A thought buried deep within me whispered that this was my doing. In the throes of denial, I hadn't just encountered the darkness, I had become a part of it. And the final glimmer of clarity, I heard the echoes of laughter, the laughter of a child, innocent and pure. I understood then, you are not just facing what they have become, you are confronting the darkness within yourself, the fear of letting go. I took a step back, absorbing the horror of their existence, accepting the guilt that had nestled within my heart. To break this cycle, I had to confront the truth head-on, instead of running from it. "I'm sorry," I cried into the abyss, grasping for the remnants of my childhood from the ashes of despair. "I will help you." The shadows recoiled momentarily, as if shocked by my declaration. I reached out, fingers trembling, grasping the air that filled with echoes of hope that perhaps together we could find solace in the light. But just as I began to feel the warmth of liberation, the darkness surged with noxious fury. "Too late. You can't change what has been done." The chorus screamed, their voices drowning the joy that flickered in my heart. A wave of shadows crashed forward, threatening to drag me into an eternity of despair. And then, in the final breath of rebellion, I remembered the doll, the porcelain doll that had been the root of it all. I spun around, seeking the source of its malevolence, only to realize it was no longer just an object, it was a vessel, the focal point connecting my sins to the remnants of their souls. "Find me, save us," it whispered, its cracked face alive with a sinister glow, a reflection of despair forged by my own hand. Fingers shaking, I grasped the doll and held it high. I could still feel the weight of those lost faces in the shadows closing in around me. "We will not be forgotten," I proclaimed, lifting it as high as I could, feeling the warmth radiate through me like fire igniting dry paper, and in that moment, I felt the balance of light and dark intertwine within my grasp. The doll trembled, vibrating with the discord of losing everything we had once known, and in one final reckoning, I cast it into the darkness. "Be free!" I shouted into the void that shrieked with rage, my voice rising above the chaos. The screams turned into wails, echoing against the walls as the darkness faltered, fragmented like glass shattering on a stone floor. I could feel the surge of light envelop me, pushing back against the encroaching darkness, bathing the room in purity. As the room began to dissolve into the light, a single voice remained echoing through the emptiness, chilling my heart to its core. You might have freed us, but now, what you have given us is the choice you have always sought to escape everything faded, engulfed in a blinding brightness, leaving me suspended between realities. And in that moment, I knew, some shadows are not meant to be banished, the darkness lingers beneath. Every smile, waiting for the moment we dare to look away, that I end the haunting aftermath, I whispered to no one, but at what cost? And for all eternity, the final echo rang through my mind: you should have never opened that door.